The good news this week is that there are more vocal allies emerging all the time, and today we're going to meet one of them. Jovan Bradley is a debate discourse streamer who takes all comers on a variety of topics and shows how badly misinformed the phobes are by offhandedly dismantling their silly arguments while doing something else. Good news starts right now.
Hello, are you here to debate?
Yeah.
All right, what's your name and how old are you?
My name is Matt. I'm 44 years old.
All right, Matt, what are you here to talk about?
I'm most concerned with the quote-unquote gender-affirming care for children.
Mm-hmm.
I realize there's a big push recently when we look at the numbers regarding how many doctors have facilitated these procedures. They've grown exponentially the last few years, specifically gender hormonal treatments, gender reassignment surgeries, clinics. If you, I think they've grown 300% in the last 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, or something similar to that.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got a few not quite right things out of the gate. You may have noticed Matt mentioned gender reassignment surgery when he's talking specifically about gender care for minors. Now, it is true that some under 18s do have some surgeries, but in the last 5 years, the number of people under 18 who have had genital surgery is in the 400 range. Yes, 400 people total in the United States. And he also mentioned that the number of people receiving gender-affirming care has tripled over a previous few years span. That's kind of true. In the years 2016 through 2020, the number of total people have receiving gender-affirming care has tripled. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, in 2016, there were about 5,000 people, and in 2019, there were almost 14,000 people, so it almost tripled. In 2020, there was a little bit of a fall-off, possibly due to the pandemic. However, this data is for all patients of all ages. It isn't specific to just children. The total number of gender-affirming surgeries has tripled, and this is during the Trump presidency. So there was a little bit of a motive to get done what you could get done before someone banned it. And that's still a legitimate concern today. And unfortunately, the way these data are presented gives us a little bit of that p-hacking that we've mentioned in previous videos, where it looks like a shocking trend if you only look at just this one little section, but we don't see what's before it, we don't see what came after it. We don't know if it's a constantly escalating curve, or if it's plateaued out, or if it started higher. We have no idea because we're only seeing this little bit of information, which makes it really easy to manipulate people.
Like, let's say puberty blockers. Do you know how many children a year receive those? Like, if you had to make a guess?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, but you would think, based on the numbers you've seen, would you think it's a lot?
I would think that it is quite a bit more than it was, say, a decade ago.
Sure. Well, I would say like most things are more than right. More people have cell phones than they did a decade ago, right? Like I don't know that it being more than a decade ago is enough for me to be worried. I don't even know if a high number is enough for me to be worried. But I'm just asking, like, if you think it's a large percentage of the population of children that are getting put on these treatments.
I would think that it is not.
You would be correct. It's only about 1,000 kids a year that get prescribed pubertal suppressants. So not a lot of kids at all.
He's in the ballpark. It varies from year to year, of course, but in that same span of data we just looked at, on the low side, it was around 2,500. Yes, 2,500 children out of the 50 million plus children in the United States, 2,500 children. On the high end, around 5,000 children.
Is 1,000 kids enough to be worried?
Absolutely. One kid's enough to be worried.
Interesting.
I somewhat agree here. One kid with a detrimental condition for which we have an easy, safe, effective, fully reversible medical treatment to help them, in which we do not help them, is a problem. Because if you can help just one person, why would you not do that?
Why do you think this to be the case?
It's the most simplistic basis that children are not capable of making life-altering decisions. Do you support children receiving tattoos?
This is a hell of a red herring. Tattoos are definitionally cosmetic. It's not something you need to save your life.
No, because the regret rate for tattoos is high even amongst adults. So we just think it'd be best if kids don't get tattoos because there's a high regret rate for them.
Okay, so here's one area where Jovan he takes the bait. He chased down the red herring. It's not a direct comparison. It's a mischaracterization of the situation, because nobody is getting a tattoo because they need it to save their life. But also, kids can get tattoos with parental approval. Kids can also get other kinds of gender-affirming care as long as they're cis kids with parental approval and no one bats an eye. A common example is breast reduction surgery for teenagers, or occasionally breast enhancement, or nose jobs, or facial feminization, or facial masculinization, or various implants in certain parts of their bodies, or being prescribed additional hormones so that they'll grow and catch up with the rest of their classmates, or puberty blockers in the case of precocious puberty so they don't get too far ahead of their classmates. All this and more are standard protocols, but no one cares because those kids aren't trans.
Okay. So is there an appropriate amount of tattoos for children that would be acceptable?
What do you mean? The regret rate for tattoos is high so we don't want kids to make decisions that they may regret.
And that's true as far as it goes, but we don't hold the same standard with other things. For instance, child marriage is still legal in 43 U.S. states. A child can't make a decision that will affect their entire life. The parents make the decision for them, but no one cares. Well, people do care. I care. I think it's revolting, disgusting, abhorrent, and immoral, but the people making a big stink out of children receiving life-saving, evidence-based medical care, they don't have any issue. In fact, they often codify laws protecting the institution of child marriage. And that's more than a little weird.
Oh, I see. I guess that reiterates my point.
No, because the regret rate for gender-affirming care is low. It's only about 3% on the high end.
Most studies show that it's in the 0.5% to 1% range. Some studies have shown it go as high as 3%. More to the point, the regret rate for literally any other kind of medical care is higher. Even stuff that no one would contest is medically necessary, such as chemotherapy. Many people who undergo chemo regret it. Even if it does save their life, they're not fully satisfied with it, and it doesn't always work. So there's that.
That's much lower than
Pardon?
tattoo. Yeah. Every study we have shows about a 3% on the high end regret rate for gender affirming care.
So 3% is acceptable to you?
A 3%. Yeah. Why would I ever say no to medical care? Because 3% of people regret it.
And you consider that medical care?
Yeah, it's to treat gender dysphoria. So yeah, I would say it's a treatment for
Gender
disorder.
dysphoria.
Yeah, it's a treatment, and every treatment is going to have a regret rate. It's unfortunate. We can do everything we can to mitigate it, to lessen the severity, and we do. That's why it's only 3%. But every single thing you can have done, LASIK eye surgery has a higher regret rate. Knee surgery has a higher regret rate. But this is only talking about one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is there's a second regret rate. What about the people who need to transition and aren't able to? I guarantee you they regret having to go through the wrong puberty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot of people with similar mindsets they shy away from that term. So I do appreciate you using that term.
Well, gender dysphoria is needed. The diagnosis is needed to get like gender affirming medical care. Typically, you need a diagnosis of dysphoria for your insurance to pay for it.
Yes and no. Insurance regulations have been changing over the years. To be clear, you do not need a gender dysphoria diagnosis or even to experience gender dysphoria to be a trans person. However, the diagnosis exists so that it can be billed. In order to get an insurance company to pay for it, you need a billing code. You need a diagnosis to get the billing code so the insurance can be billed. You don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. It's just getting diagnosed helps get your insurance on your side, which helps make the transition more financially possible for a lot of people.
I understand. My concern is just hearing testimonials from quote-unquote detransitioners and the problems that they've had. And I just I cannot, a consenting adult, I could care less as a free American citizen.
That's an interesting thing for him to say, considering almost all professional detransitioners transitioned as adults. Abel Garcia, Chloe Cole, Daisy Strongen, any name you can think of as a public, famous detransitioner, Kat Cattinson, almost all of them transitioned as adults and then regretted it for one reason or another. They were full adults. And here's Matt saying he doesn't give a crap what a full adult does or doesn't do with their own body, citing these adult detransitioners who were adults. If he really didn't give a crap, why would he bring them up?
I could care less what a consenting adult does. I don't feel obligated to placate another person's quote-unquote mental illness with gender dysphoria.
That's a weird thing to say. Does he not feel obligated to placate a cancer patient with their cancer diagnosis? Does he not feel obligated to placate a pregnant mother who has an ectopic pregnancy? Does he not feel obligated to placate a person having a cardiac arrest with their medical condition? What does he mean? How is it any business of his in the first place? But also, what does he mean by not wanting to placate people because they have a medical condition?
I'm not...
well, gender dysphoria wouldn't be a mental illness. I don't feel
compelled. Pardon?
Gender dysphoria wouldn't be a mental illness.
Well,
that's correct. Gender dysphoria is a condition, not an illness. You may recall recently there was a big hubbub over Peru trying to declare by fiat that gender dysphoria was a mental illness. Also for insurance billing reasons, according to their Ministry of Health. But that didn't sit well with people. You may also recall that in years gone by, being a homosexual was considered a mental illness. And it's not, because we learned better. Gender dysphoria is a condition for which the entire body of professional medicine worldwide has determined the only effective treatment is to transition.
Okay, what does that mean? How would you be placating by them receiving gender affirming care?
Well, by children receiving gender affirming care, quote unquote.
Yeah, how would you be placating them by them receiving gender affirming care? Them getting medical care has nothing to do with you.
That's a really great point. What does he mean by placating? Is he saying that them receiving necessary health care is bad? But also it has nothing to do with him. Why does his opinion on it matter?
No, but any child, I feel as though the treatment is detrimental to the child's well-being.
Well, that's kind of dumb, honestly. The reason we do it is because not doing it is harmful to a child's well-being. We've done studies. We found that you get the best outcomes when you assist a trans child in receiving gender-affirming healthcare. Not everybody needs surgery. Some people are fine with hormones. Some people are fine with social transition alone. Jack Turbin, that we mentioned last week, one of the studies that he participated in showed that you get better outcomes doing it this way. And Dr. Hilary Cass of the infamous Cass Review, she first came to fame in the trans discourse following the temporary closure of the Tavistock Clinic, where she herself found there needs to be more access to gender-affirming care for under 18s. That's Hilary Cass. The bottom line is that not only is it life-saving, necessary medical care, but that it produces better outcomes than not doing it.
Based on what?
Based on testimonials from detransitioners.
Yeah, for every testimonial you can give me of a detransitioner, I can give you 3 of somebody who has a positive experience with receiving gender affirming care.
It's worse than that even, because as we've noted, the regret rate maxes out at 3%, but more realistically, it's around 1%. So for every detransitioner, and it should be noted, not every detransitioner actually regrets transitioning. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of people who detransition are forced to, either for financial reasons, loss of access to medicine, or because they were forced to by social pressure, and they eventually retransition as soon as they possibly can. So it's not even that all detransitioners regret transitioning. Even setting that aside, for every detransitioner, there are 99 trans people whose lives were saved by transitioning. And once again, those detransitioners that Matt doesn't care about because they're adults but keeps bringing up were adults. So their stories don't reflect anything about gender-affirming care for children.
So how do we reconcile this? Right?
We reconcile it by waiting until the individual is 18 years old to make these decisions.
Well, that's a bit of a problem because, like we said earlier on, this isn't like a tattoo type situation where you can just wait until you're 18 and do it then. A child is going to go through one puberty or another. It's not optional. One of them is going to happen. So not doing anything is effectively making the choice for them. And worse than allowing them access to gender-affirming care, you are forcing them to go through the wrong puberty, which causes considerable mental distress, leading to very bad outcomes. And even those kids who make it through that period, make it to 18 and start transitioning then, it's a lot harder. Some things about puberty can never be undone. Other things can be, but are harder, more expensive, may require surgery to do, which even a relatively simple procedure, there's always a risk with surgery. So you're literally causing worse outcomes for people by denying them necessary medical care. So how exactly is that a more reasonable option?
The child isn't making the decision. The decision is being made by their parents and their doctors.
Okay, so again, I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if a parent says, hey, I want this, my 8-year-old, that asshole that just called you, that used a bunch of derogatory terms, he wants his child to get a swastika tattooed on his face.
Again, wild. All kinds of dog whistles thrown in there for good measure. But again, with the red herring, the child doesn't need a swastika tattooed on his face in order to save his life or just live a better life, because that's what every parent really wants for their child, right? To have a better life, to grow up and be a happy person. A better analogy would be the child has a malformed leg. Should the child have to wait until they're 18 to have it surgically corrected? Or should the parent, together with the physicians, be able to make the decision to do the much easier, smaller, less risky surgery earlier in life so that the child can grow up with a normal leg? If you have a medical condition, regardless of what it is, and it causes you harm, and we can fix it, then why in the world wouldn't we do that?
The reason we don't allow children to get tattoos is because the regret rate for tattoos is high, especially in younger individuals comparatively. That's the reason we don't do tattoos.
I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason, because 350,000 years of evolution has taught us that children are incapable of making decisions that are going to affect their entire lives.
Well, that's blatantly not true. That's absurdly not true. For 50,000 years, or at least the 5,000 years of history we have written records for, children were getting married. Children were fighting in wars. Children were doing all manner of things, and it's not even a consistent age. It's 18 for voting. It's 21 for drinking. It's 16 to drive a car. It's 14 to get a job, less if it's an agricultural job. In some states, it's 12 to buy a gun. At what point do we put the line for when a person can make the decision to receive necessary medical care? But again, no matter where that line is, the parents can consent on behalf of the child in consultation with a team of physicians. So what is the problem?
Same reason we don't let kids have candy for dinner. Same reason there's a rating system for movies and games is because we know.
Matt is coming up with really weird examples because we're not comparing life-saving medical care to what a kid kind of might want to do on a passing whim. It's so wild. I'm just picturing the orphan Oliver holding his bowl saying, "Please, sir, might I have life-saving medical care?" This isn't a whim, my guy. This isn't just a want. It's something a person needs so they don't die. Or at the very least, so they can live a better life.
Children are incapable of making decisions they're going to affect their entire life.
The reason we don't give children candy for dinner is because it's not nutritious enough for their body, which is still developing.
But that's what they want.
Do you think we just give kids gender-affirming care because they want it?
Ooh, Jovan is on the wavelength here. I think he's finally caught the thread.
That would be not what happens, hence why only 1,000 kids get put on it, even though 40,000 kids are diagnosed with dysphoria. Even the kids that are diagnosed that want it oftentimes can't get it. It's very specific who gets put on gender affirming medical care, and it's done via a benefit risk analysis by the parents, right, to see if it's more beneficial to them to have a kid who has is given gender affirming treatment, or a kid who is possibly and at risk for self-harm.
So are you familiar with how exponentially this has grown in recent years?
Yeah. So look at gay people. Do you know how exponentially it grew that people came out as gay? Like when something is tolerated more, it grows. Left-handedness is the same way. Interracial marriage was the same way. Like when we are tolerant of something, that thing tends to grow. This is not a reason why we should not have that thing. Right? I would argue it's a benefit that like more people are able to come out younger instead of waiting until they're in their 40s or 50s like they have been having to do for like most of American history.
I feel kind of called out here.
Right? There's a reason why most trans people are adults. It's because they weren't allowed to come out as kids because it was frowned upon when they were children.
Frowned upon is putting it mildly. We were invisible when I was a child.
Do you feel as though this is crafted through something in the DNA blueprint, or is this something that's crafted through conditioning?
Gender identity is a neurosocial concept. So half of it has to deal with your neurobiology, half of it has to deal with what you see socially. When it comes to gender is like a very complex mix of things, right? So for instance, if somebody is a woman, that means that their gender identity, which is formed in utero, aligns with their psychosocial schema on the female sex. And that schema is developed subconsciously from the ages of like 1 to 3. 1 to 2, probably more. But like 1 to 3, your schema develops. You don't really have control over how your schema develops.
That's more or less accurate. The specific details can be a little bit off, but the TLDR is that, yeah, there's a neurological aspect that a person cannot control. And we see this with twin studies. There is a definite biological component, and we've identified numerous neurological structures, but there is that social component, because you can't say, I fit better into this social category than this social category until you grasp what the social categories in the civilization around you are. Who you are is determined biologically, but being able to express where you fit in its society, that depends on your society and when you're exposed to that information. So you can say, hey, I don't fit over here. I fit over here.
Okay. And I do concur with that for the most part. What is popular, quote unquote, what's socially acceptable, what's normal, quote unquote, because
yes, nothing is more socially acceptable or normal, quote unquote, than being a trans person in 2024 in the United States. Yeah, clearly. It's people are just being inspired. They want to be the cool kids. Yep.
We're normalizing behaviors that have fundamentally not been normalized, like I said, for tens of thousands of years at least.
No, for hundreds of years at most. The modern concept of gender didn't originate until the colonial era in France. That was a European construct. One of our resources that you can find on our Discord and elsewhere is a map of gender diverse cultures that shows virtually every other culture on Earth. Every other culture on Earth has way more than just two genders, sometimes many more than just two genders, and those traditions go back for thousands of years. In fact, even in Europe, there were more than two until very recently. But that's another history lesson we don't have time for.
And I think that will inevitably have a detrimental effect on how our society evolves.
Wait, to argue that this was not normalized is just wrong. I mean, transness, like as a whole, was really normalized in like ancient Greek and Roman culture and ancient Egyptian culture. Like it's yeah, sure, it's not normalized in like Judeo-Christian culture, but that doesn't surprise me. But like historically, yeah, it's pretty recognized in Judaism. It's pretty in the Talmud. They literally recognize that there are 8 gender identities that people may have.
That's true. I did a video specifically on this, the 8 genders in the Talmud. There are laws from thousands of years ago, hundreds of years before Jesus. These are laws that Jesus himself, if he was a real person, understood, appreciated, adhered to, and preached about. Laws that talk about a person who was assigned male at birth and became female either through human action or natural action. They were different categories. There were 2 separate kinds of trans women, and vice versa for trans men, and other categories besides. Jewish law, talking about what rituals they have to participate in, how inheritance works with regards to them, all the things. Thousands of years ago.
It's pretty normalized in indigenous cultures. That's why they have 2-spirit individuals. Like, it's
very true.
It to say it's not normalized would just, I think, be a small way of thinking, or not small way of thinking, a way of thinking strictly American, right? And not thinking about the rest of these cultures that have.
Ethnocentrism would be the term that Jovan is searching for, I think. Because that's the idea, and Americans are so bad about this, of thinking that what's going on in our culture is what's going on in every culture, and it's the way it always has been. And we know that's not true from our own brief history here in the United States. For instance, interracial marriage, like Jovan mentioned earlier. Pretty recent, very shunned not that long ago. There's living people who still remember that. Women having the right to vote, or generally being considered equal. We've still got work to do on that front, but there are people still alive today who remember various degrees of inequality going backwards into the past. It was just celebrated July 5th, I believe, was the 50th anniversary of a woman's right to have a credit card without a man signing off on it. A lot of these things demonstrate that even American culture changes. It hasn't always been the same. And this is just one culture among many, both around the world and across time. So to say what we're doing right now is how things have always been and is the only way they could be, very Orwellian.
Have these, and I only named a few. Like, there's so many more. I just don't have them off the top of my head.
Well, we're Americans, so that would make sense. I think that's reasonable to compare it to American culture.
Yeah, I'm just saying we have to look outside of our American worldview to see that this is a fairly normal practice in the rest of the world. We can't deny the facts that, like, British colonialization had on the cultures, on, like, indigenous cultures and tribal cultures and things like that.
Well, that is certainly the case. But even in the instances you reference, there's still this, there was never an assumption that a male who identifies as a woman was a woman.
That's not correct. Man and woman are categories that have to be opted into, even if it happens to align with the expectations based on your birth sex. A cis woman opts into being a woman every single day. A cis man opts into being a man every single day. That's one of the reasons there's such a push towards agender and non-binary genders generally, because people reject those concepts because they feel like they don't fit in either one. But to take it back in time, the way Matt is implying, prior to the modern era, a person generally said what gender they were, regardless of their plumbing, and lived that way, and it was nobody else's business. We see a similar thing with homosexuality, but it's only been in the last few hundred years in the most repressive areas that people have made a big deal out of it. In other times, in other places, a person would just be a homosexual, and it was nobody else's business.
Was still acknowledged as being a man. They had different terminology throughout, and I'm painting with a broad brush here, but throughout a lot of these cultures and civilizations that have existed throughout history,
it just depends on where you're looking
is a man.
at. Like in ancient, it just depends on where you're looking at. In ancient Rome, they didn't call them men, right? They would treat them and they would act as if they were women, right? In Mesopotamia, they would do the same thing. In ancient Egypt, they would do the same thing. Two-spirit's a whole third category, so it's not even relevant to men or women. And then the Talmud just gives 8 categories. So like gender, what I'm trying to say by this is like gender is not this rigid thing that we know in the West. Gender is completely based on like cultural things.
Okay. If I'm fair complected, is it socially acceptable? Should it be socially acceptable if I identify as a black man?
Now Matt goes off into transracial nonsense, and we're going to skip that part because I'm pretty sure even transphobes know that's really dumb and not relevant to the actual conversation. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. Support our work by becoming a patron at patreon.com/thetranspositions and reap heaps of benefits. Our meme of the week was posted by Titan Uranus, and if you want to upgrade to a cool new gender, join us on Discord. That is where the memes are. For the Transpositions, I've been Ember Belrad.